I wanted to just talk about kind of my first time doing screen printing. I've done a lot of lino block printing, which I'm thinking about doing a tutorial on that. So if you're interested in that, put it in the comments so that I know. But yeah, I got to go and try out screen printing to make these shirts. Aren't they so cute? I had a lot of fun, and it wasn't exactly what I was expecting, but I learned so much, and I tried to document as much as I could throughout the process. But I went over to my friend's house, which is just, Cherour's house is like a utopia for makers and crafters. And I will put her information down below in the comments as well. Her account is Cherourworld, and she is amazing. So if you want to learn how to sew, I feel like so much of what I've learned has come from her. But so Cherour's took me through doing the screen printing process. So I'm going to just jump right into it and kind of talk a little bit about what the experience was like. So I had created some of these designs, and I wanted to see what they would look like in screen printing. And so, and I had this screen that my friend had given me, which kind of worked out. So I brought my screen over to Cherour's house. So first what she did is she helped me to coat the screen in emulsion. So kind of similar to photography, you have to use light to expose certain parts and to kind of create negative and positive spaces on the screen, which I didn't really realize that. I had watched some other videos, and they talked about using like a transfer paper and things like that. So what I ended up doing was just creating my design out of a solid paper. So anything that can completely block the light will basically create the design, and we burn the design into the screen. So the emulsion ends up being the space, it covers the space that the ink does not go through, and then the negative space is made by burning a really bright light through the screen. And so then anywhere that your design is placed, will basically, that's where the emulsion will be washed away. But then anything that the light touches will basically become a part of the screen that the ink cannot pass through, if that makes sense. So I took a really thick, we use like scrapbooking paper, so I think cardstock would probably work, just anything that's really thick. And then, so I cut out those shapes, and then we put them onto the Yudu light machine. And Cherour's has like a specific setup. So we had a tarp, kind of like a heavy canvas to block the light from us so that it didn't burn our eyes. And then we happened to use a Magic the Gathering game board and just put pressure on it. So one of the important things with screen printing is you really need to have a firm pressure. You need to have firm pressure when you're putting the emulsifier on, and you also you want to scrape as much of it off as you can and just get a really thin but a good coat. So it needs to really be thoroughly covering the screen, but you also want the emulsion layer to be thin. And so that requires really using the scraper, the official term, to get just like the perfect thin coat of emulsion onto the screen. And then you want to have a firm pressure when to make sure that the screen is just fully onto the light, to get a good exposure, right? And then, so it was mostly the longest part of the process is just preparing the screen. So you want to put the emulsifier on and then put that into a dark room, so that it doesn't expose the screen prematurely. And then you just kind of let that completely dry, which took about 30 minutes. I think we got distracted, so it was probably closer to an hour. And then we took the screen over to the light box, and that part did not take very long. It took us about 2 minutes to expose each side of the screen. And then once you expose it, then we had to wash off the emulsifier from the place where the design was coming through. And then during that process, we realized that the exposure wasn't perfect in one of the areas, so we just completely washed the emulsifier off of that area, and had to start over. So then it was another few minutes of putting more emulsifier on, and then letting it set and dry, and then re-exposing. So that part took probably total like 4 or 5 hours, just because we were getting distracted and kind of multitasking. So we would, do some of the steps, let the screen set, watch a movie, and do some sewing, and then come back to it. So it's probably a little bit quicker of a process, but it still takes time. So that's something to know when you're setting up your screen. But once the screen is set, it can last for a really long time. So you can keep your screen and reuse it over and over and over again. And eventually you can wash it out, or you can just keep the design on the screen, and that's just what that screen will be for its whole life. But yeah, so once this emulsifier was totally set and the design was totally set, we did end up exposing the screen one last time. And this time we didn't really need to cover it. We didn't need to have the cardstock on it. We were just setting the emulsion so that it wouldn't wash out. And then we were ready to print. So we got our lovely shirts. I had about 20 shirts that were ready, and then we put them on the platen. So the platen is what goes inside of the shirt, and that is just to keep the ink from going through the front and back sides of the t-shirt. So that way the ink just went directly onto the shirt. So the first layer was just putting on the red circle. So that was layer number 1. And then we had to let that dry for about 15 minutes. And then once that ink went through, we did the second layer, which was the blue dots. And then again, that had to set for a few minutes. So once we got the 2 ink layers on, then we just had to set the shirts, and you can do that either with an iron, or if you're just worried about ruining your iron, I just put them into the dryer on high heat for about an hour. And then they were done, which was really fun. So it was definitely a really good learning process, but I'm excited to try it out some more. I have a honeybee design that I'm really excited to try. But hopefully, listening to this experience was helpful for you. I think it's helpful to know that it's not something that can be done super fast. The more thoughtful and just thorough that you are in the process, the more that you ensure that it's going to be done correctly. And so that everything will go smoothly. Another thing to note is, again, just talking about having that firmness of pressure, right? Like there's some places where the ink didn't completely go through, There's some little spots here, like up at the top where the blue didn't transfer through every time. And some of that could be because the screen wasn't correctly exposed. I think in this instance it's because I don't have the best upper arm strength. So it kind of took a little bit of getting that pressure down like perfectly for the ink to go through. Also, the other thing that I learned a lot about is that there's different thread counts basically for the screens. So the finer your thread count, like the higher the number of your screen, the harder it is for different kinds of inks to go through. So my screen happened to be pretty fine. Cherise was saying that was probably somewhere like a 220. So I guess somewhere like a 130 or something like that, or like somewhere in the 100s, is a little less fine, which means that the ink can go through more easily. And you can maybe use different, like thicker kinds of ink. Because Speedball, which is a pretty, typical brand for ink and screen printing, they have a few different types of ink. The kind of typical ink that we just use the primary color set, it did pretty well on my screen, but I had also gotten a different set of ink, which apparently was thicker, and so we just didn't even try it. But I might get a few screens that have a little less of a fine thread count, and see if that would work better. So yeah, that was my first experience with screen printing. I'm definitely interested to try it out a little bit more. Although I'm also looking at heat presses. So if you personally have experience of screen printing versus using heat press, share your experience down in the comments. But anyways, thanks for joining today. To see more, follow and subscribe. Bye.